So last lesson, you guys, we spent some time talking about slope and talked about how to count slope from a graph. And that leads in perfectly to what we're talking about today, which is slope-intercept form. This whole unit, we're talking about linear equations. And a linear equation, remember, is just an equation that the graph of it is in the shape of a line. And remember, that's really easy to remember because the word linear has the word line in it. So note that there are several ways to write a linear equation, but today we're going to focus on the way that we use the most often in this class, which hopefully you remember some of this from middle school. You 100% have seen this before. I'm going to treat it like you haven't, but I'm hopeful that some of you or most of you will jump into this and say, oh yeah, I do remember how to do that. I remember seeing that. Hopefully some of it's familiar, but the most popular form for a linear equation is called slope-intercept form. And here's what it looks like. And this is what I'm hopeful that you guys have seen before, y equals mx plus b. This is like 100% a necessary skill to have in algebra and just in math classes in general. You will see this used in like every math class from here on out. So again, this is a way to write the equation of a line. You need two pieces of information about the line to write this equation. And the name gives away exactly what you need. You need the slope of the line, which we learned how to count last time, and you need something called the intercept. So in this equation, two of those letters represent those two things, and the M represents the slope of the line. Basically just tells you like how steep the line is. Can be positive, can be negative, can even be zero. Also can be undefined. We learned all that last time. So how steep the line, that's the M value, the slope. Then the B value, and we kind of just leave y and x in there. Those are part of our equations. We're used to seeing those. So it's M and B that we fill in numbers to replace. The B is something called the y-intercept. Okay, and I want you to make a note. The y-intercept of the line is where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, and again, the name 100% gives away the two things you need. You need the slope and you need the y-intercept to be able to write y equals mx plus b. Okay, so let's start basic before we kind of look at graphs and we get to graphing ourselves. Again, this lesson is really important, so please pay close attention. Starting basic in example 1, they give me an equation of a line and they say identify the slope and the y-intercept. So basically I want to find M and I want to find B. So I'm comparing this equation to my y equals mx plus b, my general form of a linear equation here. So really, you guys, the slope is just the number that sits in front of x. So in this case, there's just a negative, but know that there's always a 1 in front of a number, or in front of a variable. So the slope in this case is just negative 1. The y-intercept is the b value at the end, and it's just whatever comes after your x. So in this case, it's negative 10. Keep the sign with it. Okay, so the slope of this line is negative 1, and the y-intercept is negative 10. Okay, over here on example B, don't be thrown off that they used f of x. Remember, that's interchangeable with y. Those just mean the same thing. I want to do the same kind of thing I did on the first one, though, to say the slope and the y-intercept. So the M just sits right in front of x. So in this one, that's negative 1/4. For the b value, the y-intercept, that's what comes after x or at the end. And notice that there's nothing there. So sometimes people will say, oh, well, it must be like 1 or negative 1. If it was 1, it would say plus 1. Since nothing's there, it's 0. So there's an answer. That's an answer, 0. 0 would be where my line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so kind of watch out for that. That example's a little bit different. Example 2 is going the other way. So this time they give me m and b, and they want me to put it together and write the linear equation in slope-intercept. So I just got to write something y equals mx plus b. So in this first example, example A, I'm going to put the m, the slope, in front of x. And then I'm just going to add or subtract on whatever the b value is. And in that case, it's 13. Example B is the exact same thing. So it's 4/3 x. And this kind of like goes off of example B from up here. The y-intercept is 0, so you can write plus 0, but note like this one started, you don't have to write that, so I'm not going to. I'm just going to leave it. Y equals 4/3 x. Okay, so far pretty basic. Example C and D, we're doing the same thing. I want to write the equation, but this time they didn't make it easy for me, okay? Again, the goal is still the same. I want to write it in slope-intercept, so I need to find those two things. I need to find the slope and the y-intercept, the m and the b. But I am going to have to figure all of that information out for myself by looking at the graph of the line. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is find the y-intercept. Okay, that's where, and we kind of gave the definition up here, but remember that's where your line, so there's my line, that's where my line crosses the y-axis, which is this one. Where those two lines meet, that's my y-intercept. So it's right there. So that's kind of how I'm going to start my equations. I'm going to say y equals, and I'm going to put the y-intercept at the end. Those two lines meet at -2. So -2 is going to go at the end of my linear equation here. I just have to figure out what my slope is. That's what's going to sit in front of the x. Now, we learned this last time, so we've got to recall, how do I count the slope of a line? That's what I have to do right here. And I'm going to make a little note here. I got to count the slope. So remember last time, to do that, we found 2 points. So I already have 1 point, the y-intercept, so I'm just going to use that one. And then I see another ordered pair right there at 2, -5. So I'm going to count from left to right, my slope here. Notice that, and hopefully you would maybe be able to pick this out before you did anything, the slope of this line, because it's going downhill, is negative. Okay, so don't forget that part. But to go from left to right, I go down 1, 2, 3. So that's -3. Down is a negative direction. And I run 2. So when I put all that together, the slope of my line is -3/2. Okay, so once I found m, and maybe I'll write that off to the side here. And once I have b, I can do exactly what I did in these easier examples, and I just put it all together. Okay, so let's do one more. Same thing, I'm going to find the y-intercept first because I just think that's a little bit easier. So it's where my line crosses the y-axis. So this time, that's right there at +4. That's the b value at the end. Now I need to count the slope so I know what sits in front of x. Now use your y-intercept, and let's see, I see another ordered pair right there. So this one has a positive slope this time, it's going uphill. And from left to right, I go up 2, and I run 3. So my slope would be 2/3. Okay, so that's how you would write your own linear equation. If you can find the slope and you can find the y-intercept, then it's pretty easy to put it in mx plus b. All right, on the back. So again, a topic that you guys have done before. You do this for a few years in middle school, but let's refresh your memory. Necessary skill to have right here. So the point of the backside here is to be able to graph your line in slope-intercept form. So they're going to give me the equation, and I just have to get the picture of my line on the graph. So I'm going to give you some steps here, And if you get stuck, follow these. So step 1 is to identify the y-intercept, which we know is the b value. So find the y-intercept and then plot that point on the y-axis. So for example A, I'm going to take it step by step. So I'm comparing to mx plus b. B is the y-intercept. In this case, it's positive 1. So I'm going to go on the y-axis, okay, the vertical axis here. Don't go on the x-axis. That's a common mistake. On the y-axis, go up to 1 and plot a point. Okay, step 2 is identify the slope, or the m, and you're going to count the slope. So think like rise over run. You're going to count it from the y-intercept. Okay, here's what I mean. So in A, the slope is 1/2. Okay, so I'm going to count that from the point that I've already plotted. Don't go back to the origin in the middle and count it from there. Count it from the point you've already plotted. Okay, so here's how I'm going to do that. It's up and down. That's how you count slope. Count up and down, and then count left and right. So I'm going to go up 1 over 2 and plot a new point. You can keep counting up 1 over 2, up 1 over 2. You could count the other way and go down 1, left 2. All you need is 2 points, though, to draw your line. So once you've got 2 points at least, you can go ahead and connect them and draw your line. Make sure you put arrows on the end to show that it goes on forever in either direction. Okay, so that's it. This just takes practice, so let's do most of these together. Example B, again, don't be freaked out that they used f of x. That means the same thing as y. So this time my y-intercept is -2. So on the y-axis, I'm going to go down to -2. And I'm going to count my slope. Now, I want to point out right here, this has a negative slope, so it should go downhill. If you guys have a negative on your slope, I always put that with the top number. And for me personally, I always count right with the bottom number, always. The top number, I just have to decide whether it's up or down. If it's a positive number, I go up. If it's a negative number, I go down. Otherwise, I'm always going to count to the right. So this one, go to your y-intercept. It's -2 on top, so that tells you to go down 2 and then right 3. A common mistake is people will go down and left, but if you go down and left, that's negative over negative, which actually is a positive slope. So be thinking like big picture, step back. Positive slope should go uphill, negative slope should go downhill. So just think about if your picture looks accurate before you decide, oh, I'm done, I'm going to move on. Okay, same thing with like these two. This one has a positive slope, so it should go uphill. This one has a negative slope, so it should go downhill. Just make sure your picture looks like that. Okay, for C, we saw this example a couple times on the front. The y-intercept isn't there, so it's actually 0. So I'm going to go to the y-axis and plot a point at 0, just right in the middle. You have to do that part. Then I'm going to count my slope. Now, you want your slope to be a fraction, you guys. So if it's not 1, make it over 1. The bottom number, again, I always count right with that number. So the top number, since it's positive, I'm going to go up 3 and then right 1. And then I can connect my points and draw my line. For D, the y-intercept is -1, so go down 1 on the y-axis. Your slope this time, again, there's a -1 that's there, and you could make it a fraction by putting it over 1. So since your top number is negative, you would go down 1 and then right 1. And looking good, so positive slope for this one, negative slope for this one. My lines look like I want them to. I want you guys to do example E, and then I'm going to go ahead and end with example F. Example F, so again, the y-intercept is 0. And this one has a slope of 1. People get like all weirded out on this one when it's just y equals x and there's no numbers. But it has a slope of 0, or a y-intercept of 0, and it has a slope of 1 over 1. So you're just going to go up 1, right 1, up 1, right 1. So it'd be that line right there.